I'm Velshi with MSNBC. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 dictates the congressional procedure for certifying Electoral College results in a presidential election. Calls for reforming this act have gained traction after the events of January 6, 2021, when members of Congress challenged the electoral slates of several states. And some people, including President Trump, asked Vice President Pence not to certify those votes. Joining me now for a more perfect union is Jeffrey Rosen. He's the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. Jeff, tell us why this act was even passed in the first place and what the reforms are that are being proposed.
Well, Ali, the Electoral Count Act was passed in 1887, as you said, after the disputed election of 1876. That was an amazing drama, and basically the loser of the popular vote, Samuel Tilden, ended up getting an Electoral College majority, but there were competing slates submitted from the state of Florida, and Congress didn't know which slate to choose. So after just a tiebreaker that anticipated in lots of ways the disputed election of Bush v. Gore, Congress passed this incredibly complicated act saying how Congress should pass slates when there were two submitted by a single state and how to resolve disputes. The problem with this act is that it led, during our last election, to a situation where the Vice President of the United States was actually asked by the president not to certify valid votes that the states had submitted. And that's why a bipartisan group of senators, including Joe Manchin and Susan Collins, are meeting to reform the act. What they want to do is make sure that what happened during the last election can never happen again. And they want to make clear that the vice president has no substantive role to play whatever in certifying electoral votes. His only job is just to count them and announce what the states have certified. They also want to make it harder for individual members of Congress to object to electoral votes. Remember, we saw Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley objecting to validly submitted votes. This new reform would make clear that you need more Congress people to object and a higher threshold before any objections can be entertained. It's encouraging, Ali, that this reform is actually getting bipartisan support. Mitch McConnell has expressed some support for it. House Democrats are talking about it as well. It would be a very meaningful strengthening of the guardrails of democracy if before the next election, before we know who the candidates are going to be, Congress makes clear that it has no role under the Constitution to play in choosing the president, but is just supposed to certify the votes that are sent by the states. Back to you, Alex.
A strengthening of a guardrail of democracy that most Americans probably didn't know existed before January 6th of 2021. Jeff, thanks very much. As always, Jeff Rosen is the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. Be sure to follow Jeff and the National Constitution Center on Twitter @RosenJeffrey and @ConstitutionCTR.